This is the Cobb County Fire Marshal's office reaching out to anyone that is pulling a commercial permit doing renovation work or building a new building, a building addition in Cobb County. That's under the jurisdiction of the Cobb County Fire Marshal's office. So what we're going to address today is we're going to address the paperwork. So it talks about often a project is not complete until the paperwork's done. Well, the paperwork for the Fire Marshal's office is the project documentation. That's what we're going to walk through today and how we want you to present the documentation to our office. So this is our project documentation form. This is a list of the documentation. It may not be all-encompassing, but for the most part, this is the documentation, a list of the documentation that we'll need. Your inspector will identify which documents we want you to provide us at the end of the project. The intent is that you take each of these documents and you create one PDF and present it to us at the end of the project. The first page of the PDF will be this document, the document that the fire inspector completes, fills out, and identifies which documents you need. This will be the first page of the PDF. And then each item will be in order on the PDF as we scroll through. We'll give you some examples of those documents now. This is how the fire inspector will indicate which documents are required. They will put a checkbox next to it. There could also be more information that's required later on. But this is the communication that the fire inspector gives you to let you know which documents we need. Here's a sample of the record of completion out of the fire alarm standard. So this is the record of completion. As you see by the arrows, there's specific information required for that fire alarm installation. So as a project manager or a building owner or someone who is checking up, a general contractor who's checking up on the documentation, checking up on your subcontractor, you'll want to make sure that all this documentation is complete and accurate. That's also what the fire inspector will do. So as you'll notice here, the acceptance test for the fire alarm requires a representative of the property. So we'll need to know who that is. That's pertinent information that you're accepting that fire alarm installation. Here's an example of the inspection and testing form that's required. This is straight out of NFPA 72, the fire alarm standard. Here's an example of the inspection and testing and a section of the inspection and testing form from the fire alarm that requires supplemental information. So you see here it says attach supplementary device test sheets. So that will indicate that we'll have more paperwork at the end of this specific document that's scanned in as one PDF and presented at the end of the project. Again, as we spoke about earlier, there's a section here for the owner or the owner's representative to sign on the fire alarm documentation. Here's an example of what the supplementary document looks like for notification appliances. So this is the document that will be included behind the record of completion. Here's an example of the sprinkler contractor's above ground piping certificate. This comes out of NFPA 13, the sprinkler standard. So here's an example of what your fire sprinkler contractor will provide you to be included in the project documentation. Here's the underground and an example of the underground test certificate that will be included in your project documentation. Here's the site supervision form. This is off the state's website, but this is your sprinkler contractor is submitting this as part of your documentation. Here's your standpipe, NFPA 14, your standpipe. If your building has a standpipe, you would be required to submit this contractor's materials test certificate for the above ground installation of the piping. Here's the documentation that's required for all fire pumps. So all fire pumps will be required to submit this. This is straight out of NFPA 20, and it's the contractor's test certificate for fire pump installations. Flow test. Here's an example of the flow test form out of the AWWA manual. One reminder on all flow tests that are submitted to our office, required to have a map. So here's an example of the map that is submitted with a fire flow test to our office. Here's a clean agent acceptance test report. This is for clean agent systems. One example of a clean agent system is FM 200. Oftentimes these type systems are put into computer data centers, and so these are specialty suppression systems. A lot of times buildings don't have these, but if they did, this is part of the documentation that we would need for that installation. Wet chemical acceptance test report. New kitchen hoods that are going in would be required to have a suppression system, and oftentimes it's a wet chemical system that they use for their suppression, and this form would be required to be submitted as part of your documentation. IFC 510 or radio repeater systems, radio amplifier systems require this documentation. This is a proprietary document that we have on our website, cobbfmo.org. So you would go to our website, pull this form down, or rather your subcontractor will go and pull this form down and submit this as part of your project documentation. I want to end with, if you have questions about what documentation is required, we want you to reach out to the fire inspector. So your fire inspector is going to give you this document at your 80% inspection. When you schedule the required 80% inspection, that's part of what the fire inspector will do. In addition to give you an itemized list of what else you have left to do, they'll provide this project documentation form. If you need to, schedule a courtesy inspection with your project to get the fire inspector out on site and discuss the project documentation, or present the project documentation to your fire inspector on the job site. The last thing you want and the last thing we want is there to be some delay on your project, releasing your project, getting a certificate of occupancy, allowing you to use your building for what you're going to do because of the paperwork. We want to help you hold your contractors, hold your subcontractors responsible for all the documentation. We want to thank you, and we want to remind you that we are available. Here's our phone number to our main office, to our administrative staff, and here's our website, cobbfmo.org. Thank you.